Welcome to the Nick Hilera Show. This is the place where we explore big ideas with people having a big impact on our world. I'm your host, Nick Hilera, serial entrepreneur, author, early morning riser, and seeker of truth and wisdom. Join me as we explore the journeys and discoveries of fascinating people who are literally unlocking the secrets to creating a life of both success and fulfillment. Each episode will arm you with insights, ideas, and practical perspectives on what it takes not only to be financially and personally successful, but also how to start having authentic impact on the world around you. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. This week, we are featuring Cynthia Mitchell-Heard, a longtime civic leader and the current COO of the Los Angeles Urban League. I wanted to have Cynthia on the show to dive deeper into the topic of racial justice, something that's been top of mind in this country lately, and an issue that's already come up in some of our previous episodes. Both Miguel Santana and Ana Guerrero talked about the role that racism has played in their lives and explored its implications to the public policy landscape today. In this important conversation, we went deep into the issue and explored how economic opportunity has replaced civil rights as the key battleground in the fight, why the era of corporate grandstanding and virtue signaling has to come to an end, how equity is really a function of diversity and inclusion, and why privilege is something that should never eclipse service. During this discussion, I could literally feel Cynthia's frustration at the lack of progress on this issue over the course of her career. But I walked away feeling both inspired and optimistic by her passion and her steadfast commitment. And I think that you all will too. Thanks again for tuning in. As always, hope you enjoy. Hey guys, this is Nick. I wanted to take a quick break from the episode to share some exciting news. In addition to the podcast, I want to make you aware of some additional content we're putting out. And best of all, it's 100% free. Our Profit Plus newsletter consists of weekly insights about what it takes to find meaning in the pursuit of modern success. This is the place where we explore big ideas at the intersection of markets, business, politics, and life as we seek to empower our readers to have an authentic impact on the world. If you're serious about finding fulfillment amid success, then definitely check out these additional insights. Just go to subscribe.nickhilaris.com. Again, that's subscribe.nickhilaris.com. Now let's get back to the episode. All right. Well, welcome everybody back to the Nick Hilera Show. I'm excited to bring on a really special guest, Cynthia Mitchell-Heard, who is the current Chief Operating Officer of the Los Angeles Urban League and a longtime civic activist and public servant. Is spending the better part of maybe 2.5, 3 decades serving the greater South Los Angeles, not South Los Angeles, the greater Los Angeles area. And Cynthia, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. This show means a lot to me, and thank you for inviting me to your wonderful podcast.
Thank you.
Looking forward to a great conversation.
Yeah, me too. I figured a good place for us to start is what you're involved in, right now. You've got this big leadership position at an important kind of public-facing institution for the city of Los Angeles at an interesting time as a COO of, the Urban League. So tell us about that.
Well, post-COVID, such a tremendous and tumultuous time for us, not only in Los Angeles, but in the world. And so as I began to settle in on what might be the next steps for my career, for our country, for Los Angeles, lo and behold, this opportunity came up. Been in the job about 10 weeks now, so take it easy on me a little bit.
Yeah, it's still relatively new.
Still absolutely fresh. But what's so wonderful is, the Urban League has been around for 100 plus years. And so it's been there through the times of civil rights advocacy and all the tumultuous, crazy times of our country. And then it circles back, right? Right again to what's happening. It almost looks like a mirror image. So for me, seeing all of that and then being put at the helm, at least Chief Operating Officer, to try to make a difference at the systemic overlay of Los Angeles. And what do I mean by that? Post-COVID, things were crazy. We really found out that there was not a lot of access for folk. And so this really gives me an opportunity. Well, when I say folk, I mean marginalized communities. This really gives me an opportunity to help script the rest of the narrative, um, to help script what the communities are saying post-COVID that they need, and to hope activate that, to increase partnerships, to reevaluate partnerships, to look at what's working and what's not working is pretty important to me. And so this is a great time. Being the first woman in this position, that's pretty important to me too. I didn't know that at first. And when finding that out, I realized that I was going to be able to knock through that ceiling and to be able to maybe propel us in a few other directions that I hope will advance our city. And with the new leadership of our first African American mayor, Karen
Also,
Bass,
first female.
a first female. Oh, we share something in common. I'm looking forward to what the future leads for us.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. This episode of The Nick Halera Show is brought to you by Metros Capital. If you're an investor looking for direct access to real estate investments, then we'd love to talk with you. Investment opportunities at Metros Capital balance financial returns and community impact. To learn more, contact us at metros.nickhaleris.com. Again, that's metros.nickhaleris.com. Now let's get back to the episode. Yeah, me too. I feel like it's an interesting moment in time as you reference with this COVID stuff. And before I forget, I read online that you had worked with Mayor Bass for quite some time and throughout your career, right?
Yes. All the way back to the state assembly. One of my passions is foster youth. I have been engaged with foster youth from the inception of my career. And foster youth are very near and dear to my heart. And when Karen was first coming out of the community and was going into state legislation, that was her baby. And so we have linked forces for that for decades, and through her state assembly, then on to the congressional offices. And then we've done many hearings around foster youth. Again, leveling the playing field. That's really what I do, is find out where the inequities are and go to bat for the underdog.
Yeah, and that population is like the most, not the most in need, but perhaps one of the highest in need in the whole country at this point.
Foster youth and homeless are one of the same.
Yeah, you end up homeless like pretty high percentage, right? If you're
Correct.
foster youth. Yeah.
It feeds the funnel. So when we look at systemic change, if we break down the systemic barriers that cause foster children to go even into the funnel, look how we already are starting to change that narrative. Because currently, right now, as we look at what's happening with the homeless, if we don't jump ahead of their graduating class, if you will, and I know that sounds crazy to say that, but by kids, by no fault of their own, they're ending up in a black hole. They're graduating, nowhere to go. Some have no degree, no high school degree, some no parental guidance. I know for all of us and for our children, if we were dumped out there at that point at 18 years old, I'd have to say, if I didn't have parents to be able to lean on and to talk to and to guide me, I don't know if any of us would be where we are today. So yes, I will always be the voice for foster youth. And if I could have had my druthers, I would have had tons of them in my home. But I was out there at that time fighting the battles and still fight the battles. And I believe that people really need to give a little more focus. You know, societal ills, it ebbs and flows. You know, one minute we're on human trafficking, next minute we're on foster care, next minute you're on homeless. But there's a common denominator to all of it. Systemic barriers, systemic ills, societal norms, all of that. So if we might start focusing on some of those concerns, maybe we wouldn't have the outpour of our societal devastation that we have in 2023. I don't know. I'm not a guru at it, but I feel pretty strongly about it.
Yeah, for sure. I can tell.
Yeah.
No, it's a good point though.
Don't get me going.
Yeah. No, it's a great point though, because, you watch like these social or the civic activist campaigns that come about sort of through social media or something. So like, remember when there was the war in Ukraine, then everybody had a little Ukrainian flag on their thing, and everyone's donating money for that in small amounts or large amounts of whatever. But the next week there's a school shooting and everyone's doing that. And at the core of it, all of this is well intentioned because like people donating their money and speaking forth, but at the core of it, though, are some real problems that need to be addressed, as you mentioned, that are systemic. That you can't just like donate to a GoFundMe page and think that that's going to be the answer to foster youth and homelessness, for example. It's a lot more complicated than that.
Absolutely, it's more complicated. But I think what worries me, Nick, is that you spoke in opening. You said, "Hey, Cynthia has 30 years, 3 decades." It's sad that we're still talking about this. I've dedicated my whole entire life to marginalized communities, my entire life. Why are we still talking about this? It shows that no one individual, no one group of individuals are going to be able to help eradicate any of this. And I don't know anymore if we should use the word eradication, because I don't think that deems true. I think that collective partnerships are one component, but we all have to get on the same page. And we can't let our systemic dollars drive us, because the conversations go back and forth. And yes, at some point there's a common denominator. But as soon as the dollars drop on the table, all of a sudden it becomes laser focus on what one's area of specialty is. Housing, education, healthcare. Doesn't matter. That conversation keeps happening. After 40 years, you see the polarization of that continuing.
Yeah, it's true. Like spending is the actual moment in time and in which our system prioritizes. And like if you look at it on a national level, like we prioritize things like defense, 800 billion, right? You start to think like, okay, what does this country really care about? Well, that's a pretty big line item. Like I think it's the number one line item in the budget. Correct. And then you get down into other programs like Section 8, for example. Before the pandemic, Section 8 was like 20 billion. They've upped it recently because there's such huge need for it, but it's still like compared to defense, it's nothing. I think it's like 70 billion last year. So that's a good example of what you just described.
Look at how HHH rolled out. It's indicative of the funding pots. And I think that we have to pay attention. I think one of the prime examples you mentioned are Mayor Bass. The prime example of how she will get around just that is going to be an example for changing systems to the call of action by which it is at that point, and not adhering to the same barriers. Because if we adhere to the same barriers, we might as well pack up and go home.
Yeah. And you're talking about homelessness.
Not just homelessness will be one. Housing. How do you eradicate homelessness without the unhoused? Let's use that. The unhoused without a house, a place, which means we better start either utilizing our open vacant spaces, motels or otherwise, whatever that plan may be. It may be to create more affordable housing, but yet and still, as the plan is, let's not worry about paperwork and ID and all. You're homeless. You probably don't have that. Probably wiped away. If foster children, if they need access to something, guess what? They may not have their educational records. Some go through 4 and 5 and 6 houses. How are you going to keep up with your stuff? And often people are just putting all your stuff in a bag and moving you to another foster care home. You see, we can go deep into this all day long, but it really is the systemic barriers to the problem. And I don't know, I don't have that answer anymore, because we've talked about it over and over. How many coalitions have we convened? How many transition teams have we convened? How many community, associations do we need to talk about? We're in kind of a pickle here, And either we lay it all out on the table and believe it and really do it and not change the game after we go back to the office. And when we really talk about change, we have to get real now. There's no more time. And not that we weren't real before. I just think, like we just said, common denominator, the dollar, skews the conversation in the reality. Cynthia Heard's opinion.
Yeah, I think that's right. I feel like there's a fatigue out there in this community, but also across the country, not just on this issue, but just let's just focus on homelessness because that's what we're talking about. Like going into this election, which Mayor Bass won, there was fatigue across the city around homelessness about like, man, is this ever gonna, the ordinary Angelino's asking him or herself, like, is this ever gonna get better? And there have been a lot of well-intentioned efforts throughout your career, for example, to try to address this. And it just keeps getting worse and worse, and the frustration levels dialed up. And I feel like this is a really critical moment on that issue and many others across the country. Like, we better fix it or we're in trouble.
Absolutely. And I'm so excited about this evening's address for the first 100 days report to really hear. We have a lot of faith in our new mayor. And it's nice when people come into politics that understand both sides of the coin. And she definitely is a community advocate, so she knows the barriers of it all: mental health, housing, and otherwise. So, we're looking forward to seeing what happens from that, and hopefully, this plan that we can all continue to support. But you're absolutely right; people are tired. They're tired on both ends. There's also folks that are getting dismayed with donor fatigue too. You're putting all these dollars, philanthropic dollars, to do this, this, and this, but yet and still the needle doesn't move. So you're working with supporting all entities and trying to bridge hope still, give everybody an opportunity. But at some point, everybody has to stand accountable for their end of the deal. Everybody. And I didn't leave out our law enforcement, our healthcare systems. It all plays a part into the wellness of a community. So everybody's got to stand up and do their part.
Yeah.
In a real way.
Yeah, your point about donor fatigue is a super important one because I've seen it firsthand. Like, I've been approached. I've been the chair of the Triple H Commission since Miguel stepped down in like 2018 or something like that. So it's been quite some time. And throughout that time, business leaders have approached me and said, hey, why don't we get the Los Angeles business community to step up and do an affordable housing fund like Microsoft has done in Seattle or Google and Facebook did up in the Bay Area. And the conversation with business leaders around LA is all about fatigue. They're like, I'm not putting $1 in that. Where's it going to go? Go to an $800,000 unit, studio apartment unit. So there's just like so much skepticism, so much fatigue.
It's about impact. Everybody now, we all want to see impact. Nick, COVID really did something. And I always go back to that because I remember when it first hit and we all knew not. I don't know how many people really are around to have lived in a pandemic. So post that, it changes lives. It changes one's perspective. Even corporations, we can work from home, hybrid, all of this stuff. So even when you speak of donor fatigue, we as a society are fatigued. And then we go back into our role. So if we're a part of corporations that plug into to emphasize change or impact in our dollars, hoping that it leverages, now we really want to see it because we've seen war-like numbers of casualties and victims in our own cities across the country. So it's no more about, well, this is just enough. This is what you're doing. Okay, let's go with this. No, we need to see something pretty big. And they're not playing. Corporations aren't playing either when it comes to conversations. But corporations need to do better too. It's not just okay to bring in a DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion division, and yet and still your top brass isn't accountable for hearing from those groups and really putting in effort into, from their chairs on down, that this is an absolute component that we believe in to execute to the community for equity, for inclusion. Because the one thing that I believe and note that really diversity and inclusion equals equity. So if you really don't believe in the formula and you're only going on the syntax you're not going on the content, but you're really just going on the conversation to meet whatever criteria you're responding to because George Floyd died. George Floyd got terribly killed. I guess corporations now, we need to make sure that we get out here and do our piece. I think that's where we are. And it's not of all, because there's some companies that have done a smash up job. And then there's some that still need to step up a little bit, but maybe step to the community and ask us, what do we need to also help? And where would that byproduct be to help support the community and not just do it in a silo?
And not just a virtue signal like you suggested, like a lot of companies do. Like,
Yeah.
let's have a DEI officer and put out some fancy reports and stuff. But who are we hiring? Who are we promoting? Who are we?
And we just talked about it. That was 2 years ago. Do you realize that some DEI divisions are now being not written into the budgets for next year? That's interesting. I thought it was a big issue. Why did the conversation stop? Did we eradicate something? No. That's why I told you. I think we need to even stop using that word, eradication of. I don't know. I'm. You don't want to when you've been in this business. You want to remain hopeful for your children, my grandchildren, that they will always have a place at the table. That they will not be seen as something different, regardless of color or religion. But I don't know, if I asked you that question, would you be able to say you had a lot of faith that your children, your young children, will not be fighting this fight in 15 years when they go to do a community project? Will this be the topic? If it is, it means we all failed on a real deal.
Yeah.
And that's sad to me, that we are one of the richest nations, and we're sitting up here talking the way we're talking. It's horrible. It's horrible that we've transferred this and that we can't see the needle moved. We should be ashamed of ourselves.
Yeah. It's a sobering thought to think. But I guess the flip side is, like, take, for example, the Urban League. The Urban League's been at it for over 100 years. And in that span, it's went from like really, really bad to now maybe just really kind of bad. It's still bad, obviously, right? But like the progress, the generation of people who worked at the Urban League over the years have seen like monumental improvements across some aspects of the problem. And so that's a hopeful thing. The civil rights movement was a success. And
well, we see voting, you see some access, but yet still we're dealing with inability to have the same playing field when it comes to employment. Yes, it moved the needle so Black folk could get employed. People of color can get employed. It moved the needle so Black folk could have voting rights. It moved the needle so we didn't have to drink in the back of the building to get some water. But now let's put it in 2023. We have done some monumental key changes. But what is troubling is today we still have what happened down in Georgia. We still have kids that can't, and families that can't go certain places and do certain things, or cannot get to the top of the table to actually be the board chair. We know that, yes, this is great, but why don't we see more people of color as chairman of the boards and of corporations? Why are we, and we can go on and on and on, where people of color are just now being able to be in certain places. We can talk all the way through sports. Why isn't it that general managers and heads of sport teams are just happening? Hello? When most were people of color? It doesn't matter what there is. We know that we all must do better. And right now, the Los Angeles Urban League, what's so wonderful is looking at financial stability. How can we make certain that not only everybody has a place at the table, but you're playing at a level not of poverty and not at just the level of existence, but we are able to create opportunities for small businesses to be created. That's moving the needle, and to where Black folks are leading that and leading that charge. What's very interesting is we know that $1 in the community, in the Korean community, stays forever and a day. And yet still in the Black community, it's in and it's out. We're trying to create opportunity where those dollars stay longer in the communities of color. The other component is over the 100 years, it has been generally focused on, yes, our community, African American community. But we know that Los Angeles is no longer homogenous. So we know that that's not a conversation anymore that's going to continue in that way. We must bring people of color to the table to discuss how do we move and do this together. We talked about systemic barriers earlier. If you don't bring that conversation into the fold, close the door. It's not real. You have to bring that conversation to the table. And that does not just include the Latin and the Black community. It includes the Jewish community. It includes the Korean community. We in Los Angeles are so homogenous, are not homogenous. We are so multifaceted and multididactic in all that we do. We're no longer homogenous. And so that conversation has to be inclusive. And so when you look at the South Los Angeles area, remember, South Los Angeles is no longer an African-American community. It is a community that is almost, in its percentage, Latino. So when we look at the Los Angeles Urban League, we are looking across Los Angeles, not just in certain areas and geographic areas any longer. And it really is to increase financial stability, economic overall gain and stability, and access for all. That's going to be the narrative that tweaks just a little differently. And we speak of the civil rights, certainly. Our communities, our organizations such as this were key. All entities needed organizations to be the voice and to bring together the level of power and fight back that needed to happen. It's just different in the sense now that, I'm not going to say different. It hurts my heart that in 2023, we still have to have this kind of fight back. Why do I have to use the word fight back? And I use that word because equity. Until everybody gets a seat at the table, I guess you got to fight to get to the table. So when you really get down beyond all the minutia, beyond all the political, whatever it may be, let's just get to the real dialogue of the talk. My opinion.
So the Urban League, it sounds like, is still obviously true to its legacy of promoting civil rights, but is focusing much more on the economic stuff. Like, what kind of programs is the Urban League doing to support economic opportunities and growth for marginalized communities?
We have entrepreneurial centers that work with SBA, bringing in partners. We're working with the banking institutions to create home loans for those marginalized communities, to give startup businesses, not only for the communities, but for women-owned businesses, the LGBT community, and other communities that are looking at strife that may not be able to, again, get a seat at the table. We're working with organizations such as J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, PNC, Citizens Bank, Wells Fargo, who's done an amazing job to help kind of recalibrate the conversation of what does this look like. We have Biz Camp, teaching kids, not only in marginalized communities, but teaching kids of color, what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? How do you access that? How do you even rope your mind around thinking about business in a way and being given those tools at an early age. Sometimes in the community, those conversations just don't happen. And so the Urban League works tirelessly to make sure that we work with high schools and junior highs to bring information to the communities, to the schools, and also execute summer camps. There's also a biz institution that does this all year round. But more importantly, we also have a project called Project Ready. It works with juniors and seniors in educational resources. We also are involved in bringing to the community corporations and partnerships in information and resources. So it's a full continuum of care that works from the very front end to the very high functioning. You don't have to be from a marginalized community only to get resources from the Los Angeles Urban League. We're really looking at the wellness of communities and what does it take to stabilize a community. So those that might be in poverty or marginalized or compromised, we're there to help support them. We're there to help bring resources to them. But on that other end of individuals that are looking very stabilized, but they need just a little help to get their small businesses going. Remember, many small businesses after COVID. So if the community itself was kicked by COVID and the pandemic and not being able to have access to certain resources, certain information. Remember, PPP loans, whatever it may be, once they were out, they were out. So you were on your own. Why did certain businesses make it and other businesses fell to the ground? Is it race related? Nah. Was it about poverty in the community? I don't know. Was it about lack of access to those resources, or was it about the ability to know where those resources were and who those individuals were? And that sometimes is the difference between the haves and the have-nots. And I think that when we talk about that ultimate middle class, the Urban League wants to make sure that we're able to bring people from over here to the center. We're able to help the center get to the top. And we're hoping to help the top maximize their wealth and re-engage it back into the community. That would be the ultimate plan. I know it sounds a little idealistic, but I'm thinking it can happen.
Yeah, it's a great plan. I love it.
Yeah, pass the plate now?
Yeah, right. You mentioned earlier this phenomenon where like a dollar in the take Koreatown, a dollar that gets earned in Koreatown stays in Koreatown, but that's not necessarily true in other parts of the city. What is that about? Why does that happen that way?
I think that in our communities, we may have somewhat of a displaced value of what it means to support your own community and to not take that away from your community until you've strengthened your own. And with the way our cities and our communities have been restructured, it's still very, very fluid, I think, in the way the geographics of our city are moving. And so, I don't have a firm answer with that. I think just sometimes the value of a dollar may not be the same in our community as it is in other communities, such as the Korean or the Jewish community.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like the segregation conversation is not over because we may have gotten rid of sort of like state-sponsored racial segregation, but America's still like incredibly segregated place.
Well, nice to talk about that. Again, George Floyd. Again, post-COVID, our mouths were dropped. People were able to take off their white sheets in 2023. I was shocked to tears. We had many conversations about this in our family, about the racism, the overt racism I questioned it. I didn't think it was like this. My God, this was like KKK all over again. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's just that people felt comfortable. And we don't know. That's probably a conversation for another day, why people felt comfortable. It's very scary, even in Los Angeles County, sometimes when you make an error on a street and you might pull in front of somebody. And because your skin is black or brown or different, somebody calls you out of your name and uses the N-word to you. College grad, sitting on the top, whatever percent. But isn't it funny? Somebody feels very comfortable to still call you that in 2023. And that person was me. Happens all the time. People feel they just might want to call you out your name. And so can you imagine what that's going to feel like for our children, who we teach that perhaps you may or may not have to deal with this? Or do we teach our children, beware? I can speak from an African-American person. I still have to teach my son and children, beware. If you get pulled over, this is what you say. If you get pulled over, keep your hands on the steering wheel. That's kind of sad. It's sad.
It's really sad. Yeah.
It's sad.
2023.
Mm-hmm. So is that all going on still? Yeah, it is, in a big way. That's the importance. Do I think that the Los Angeles Urban League or any other civil rights advocacy agency is going away anytime soon? I think that that's the reason why it needs to continue to be funded. It just needs to be modernized in a way that is relevant, that makes sense, and speaks to the voices of our children. Yes, it has been around 100 years. It has. And things to some should have changed. But I think the more we let people know, and to the population of kids that were out in the Grove that day asking for change, and in the streets of New York and in the streets of DC saying it's time to make a change, we have to speak to that. Yes, respect for the generation that has come before us. We don't get to these kids and let them know, how do we work this together? But we have to be able to work together, not speak at them, because they clearly see it. But something's gone awry because some of the children were those people at the Capitol too. That means they've already drank the Kool-Aid. So that means by the time our kids grow up, they've already got the game down, the segregation game down, that white is right. So are we in trouble, aren't we? I don't know. I'll ask you that question.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think my theory on it, or my hypothesis, is that America is segregated inside on a very like stark insider outsider ground, that it's very based about class, and race is part of class too. So you can't really separate these things, but like the fundamental problem is ultimately the lack of economic opportunity, and the frustration is about that as much as it is about, in the previous generation, it was about political and civil rights. The battleground has shifted. It's not like the battleground, like it's over. We didn't declare victory, because obviously police brutality is still happening.
Right.
But the battleground has shifted, and the younger generations are, I think, reacting to the fact that it's America's one place if you make it, and it's another place if you don't. And guess what? The chances of making it are way higher for like a white person than a black person. And so it's still skewed on these racial grounds. It's a different conversation than, can I vote or access my political rights, but
it truly is the have and the have-nots, Nick. And for people of color that have penetrated the Ivy Leagues and done very well, people of color that are now at the top echelon, so they are a part of the haves. But yet and still, so that means, okay, can you imagine? I've checked this box, this box, this box, this box. Why are we still having this conversation? But even for those now that they've put into the have and the have-nots, why in a society that we have are we even talking about folks that are sitting down at this end of the line? What are we doing as a country, and what are we doing in Los Angeles The rents in Los Angeles have gotten so bad that the homeless are camping out in Beverly Hills, and you kind of have to laugh at it a little bit. Like, okay, you priced me out. I still got a little grass over here. I'm going to still live over in this community or over at the beach. Got me beachfront property. At some point, what are we doing to make certain that we bridge that gap? In California and Los Angeles, pretty soon folks aren't going to be able to even afford rent. And second of all, children that are able to make it in whichever way they do, they can't get in the game unless their parents help them with their down payments. The housing market is so extreme. How do people get a break to just neutralize the landscape? That's why we have such a mad exodus.
Yeah,
People are getting out of town.
Yeah, it's the housing. My view on housing is it's like this meta issue. Like a whole bunch of other issues are boiling up into housing and housing inequality and housing affordability issues.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like local political corruption, lack of economic opportunity, and bad federal policy. Like we got into this mess. Like part of the reason why housing went crazy is because of the great crash and how we responded to it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and it's playing out not just here in LA, but all across the country now. The
Mm-hmm.
same fight is happening,
Mm-hmm.
and it's unresolved. It's a big unresolved question.
And my fear for that is, do you remember, we just talked about 100 years ago, but let's just go back into the 60s, say, for example, or the 70s. So the idea was, you got your life, you tried to go to school, you get your thing, or if not, or you go into a trade, but you were able to buy a house. You were able to start your family. All those were able tos are disappearing for this next generation, at least in Los Angeles, unless you are a half. So then what does that create for those? And being of the half, what does that mean? What does that actually mean? That you can afford to buy a house? Okay, well, most people can't now. So I don't know. I'm really dismayed but hopeful. But I'm going now to the generation that I think gets it. And I think that this next generation is all about the reality, no BS. There's no conversation about it. It's either let's get it done. It may not be so orthodox. It might look different. And that's okay. Because the reality is whatever was happening before, maybe it might be cool to figure out additional ways by which to garner success. I don't know. But I'm willing to put my money there. I really, really am. And I hope that their passion for mankind, as long as the generation doesn't come so self-enthralled, because there is that unconventional way to make money now. It's a lot of stuff going on, and they're making a boatload of money, just a boatload. So that whole conversation of, oh, go get the house, it doesn't have an order anymore. It's their order. And I think we at the other side need to turn back around and really listen, because I think that they may have something to the future that they can teach us. Actually, I know it.
Yeah, I think so too. And I was thinking about your definition earlier of equity, which I really love. I think if I restate it, correct me if I'm wrong, you said you basically just have to get the diversity plus the inclusion, and then equity is basically the natural consequence of that.
It's the outcome.
And I really believe that, and I'm optimistic about the younger generation, because my just to share, my kids go to this phenomenal school here in LA that is very, very intentional, and they don't just play lip service to diversity and inclusion. Like the place is diverse, and it's done well, and it's across races, it's across cultural backgrounds, it's across socioeconomic status. And my kids in first grade and kindergarten, they have such a different upbringing as a result of this diversity, that their like mental construct of race is totally different than where I grew up, where it was very much in your face, and my exposure to it, that it was insider outsider or us versus them or whatever, growing up in suburban Detroit, where it's basically racist television. But they're just different, and they don't think about it the same way at all. So I feel like you actually could, if education was structured that way across the whole country, you could make one generation, maybe you could get rid of racism.
Well, and I like how you just brought that up, because that was my structure when I thought of also putting children through school, and the same type school. And then they're raised with this wonderful exposure to the opposite of all that we've been discussing today, where everything, there's solutions to the negative. There's ways of looking at things in such a positive way to bring just wonderful elements to what is left to us in this world. But what I worry about is walking outside those safe doors. And it's good, because right now all the parents are there and they're loving it. But what scares me sometimes is what happens behind our own private closed doors that then skews that beautiful model that you were talking about. And I don't know how to help that, because these children that are coming out, they know not. They're learning it. I love that little meme, or on Facebook I've seen it, where, it's about the kids that are tainted because of us. They come here so innocent. How? It just kills me. So more models like that would be wonderful. And I think so many people try to do that. And then our poor kids just have to go out into this world. The other day, I think it was yesterday, I heard that some teenagers or kid was at a birthday party. So, what happens? And I know we all don't think it'll happen to us, but I think it's been getting closer and closer and closer to us. All those negative ills of society get a little too close. And now, how do we feel that we can protect not only our own, but protect our families, our friends, our communities, and the culture in itself? The whole culture, not siloed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's why the segregation part worries me the most. Like, I have been investing in real estate, and I have basically two places of business that I do. I here and locally in LA, and then in the Southeast. So started investing there in like 2010 or something. And what I notice about the Southeast, this is like greater Atlanta, let's say, is that the city is a diverse city. It's very diverse. It's almost as diverse as Los Angeles. But because of the way it's laid out geographically, like it's basically incredibly segregated along class and race lines. And I think a place like Los Angeles actually has an advantage in my view when it comes to like dealing with race problems, because of the way we're set up geographically. Like we're not so segregated. Whereas in Atlanta, you could have an apartment complex like at the end of a street, 5 miles, 6 miles from anything else. It's completely segregated environment. Whereas in LA, yeah, you might have communities that are segregated as well, but you go a couple blocks and you're at the beach, or you go a couple blocks and you're in Koreatown and you're in a different environment. So there's an advantage, I think, to what we have here in LA. But down in the South and these other communities where we're seeing, unfortunately, a lot of these like violent acts, maybe racially motivated violent acts, that's the segregation is real, and it's like different.
yeah, it definitely is. Los Angeles is a cool place to live. We just have some things we need to pull back and correct. And I think, taking it full circle, I think I know our current mayor is going to make a difference. The beauty of Los Angeles, we know, was having it so multicultural. The beauty of its landscape, and who can go from the mountains to the beach in one day. But we have to work on a couple of issues of access and quality that I think have been now questioned. And we never really here in Los Angeles had to face that. You had your certain areas, but it's across the city now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and what you mentioned earlier, the housing thing is a big deal.
Mhm.
I interviewed for this show, actually, a mutual friend of ours, Miguel, and he
Yeah.
was telling us stories about his family, which, they were able in the previous generation to acquire this house, and
Yes.
build a foundation of the family around this asset that they were able to, where fast forward and Miguel's kids, they can't. And so they're moving out of town. And so he was using that juxtaposition to
I
make a
just
point.
heard that story a couple of weeks from him, and we were comparing the city by which they moved to the city, and we're like, that city used to be that with all the issues, and now it's some of us. So you're
Yeah.
absolutely correct. But I will forever be optimistic. I've grown up in a family that is philanthropically engaged and has always been about creating a better community for all. And so each and one of us take that very seriously in who we are and how we navigate and what we do. And although we're in different professions, that element is a core of our family. And so I'll continue to be optimistic that the conversation we had today, although I'm always going to be truthful, but I know that we can get this done. And I know that together with people like yourself and others, we're all submerged in all kinds of areas. So I know that we can pull this together. It sounds a little bit idealistic, but I think if the generations before us, although we say that we need a little bit of a different take, they did a really damn good job at creating a landscape, not only here in Los Angeles, but across the country. And so now it's our job to just take that and do a little better. And it's our job to take it to the children of your school, the children that are the youth that are here in Los Angeles, or to the skilled team that you have here today, to tell them that they've got a piece in this. Don't turn a blind eye to your responsibility. And although it may not affect you today, it will affect you possibly in the future. So don't turn a blind eye. And that's just something I really believe in, and that's something that was ingrained in us. And I hope to carry that on through my family and hope to make a difference one day.
From your work. Yeah, I'm curious, like it can tell just looking at your track record and your career that you must have felt some kind of call to public service, and you kind of just hinted at it, but like where did that come from? What did your family do to make you so passionate about this?
Well, a couple things. Um, my father grew up very poor, and his mother died very early on in his life. And so my grandfather was a porter on a railroad, and he was left to his own means to survive. And he had a really cool aunt that took him in, and she happened to have been a part of the Kojic Church of God in Christ community and of a very, really famous um, spiritual family called the Crouches. And so they were very big in the Church of God in Christ. And so they kind of pushed him to do what he did and to move along in his endeavor. But when he went along that path, he grew a sense of give back. And in the spiritual community, which he really wasn't, but he learned that giving to a community was super important. And when he finished, he could have started a practice anywhere, Beverly Hills, wherever. He chose to start it down on 73rd and Western, which is 1 block away from the riot upheaval in the 80s, I think I want to say. And as a kid, he would always take us down to the clinics to work. And so while other people were having a great time in this summer, we were working. And when you work in a clinic that's in the community, you see a lot of different things. And I would see sometimes people that would come in and wouldn't be able to afford their health care. And this was a little bit before Medi-Cal and all the Blue Cross and the Medi-Medi. This was a time where you just had your community doctor, or they weren't able to afford their medication sometimes, or their kids needed a physical, or their kid was trying to get out of the neighborhood and had been accepted to college or to med school, and their bill would go away. Somebody paid 4 years of college, and it come to find out it was my dad. And when you're working and you're seeing all this and you're learning about and you're seeing, wow, why did you just do that? Why don't they have you were taught very early on that too much who is given, you know the rest.
Yeah. Much is asked. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so when that is a part of your philosophical base, you just know. And it's something that I love to do. I think that it is your God-given responsibility. And I also think that when you make it to the slot of being called a have, you owe it to turn back and make sure that there's many more to come. And especially now that our country has turned to be more socioeconomically inclined and less, it's more about classism, that I really learned the lesson now. And I have a brother-in-law who I love dearly. And I love dearly because he too and my sister give back in a way anonymously. It's not about people knowing that you can give. It's about wanting to change the needle. And another very quick story, just to show how it's moving towards the generations. I have a nephew that started a fishing company. I'll call it a company, a nonprofit, in his very early high school years to give back. He is now feeding thousands, and during COVID was able to feed thousands from a mere hobby of fishing, turned to a philanthropic love, turned to feeding and working with partners. So when you say it is the responsibility, sure, you don't have to. You be off floating going to the Caribbean. You can do a lot of things. I could be off at the country club, but I choose to go down to Crenshaw and Vernon and see what I can do. And I've always worked within communities that are marginalized, and I always will. So sometimes when we ingrain, like you say, with your children, and your children are seeing by where you have placed them, that will end up being ingrained in their spirit. So no matter who does what or how does what, when it's ingrained in your spirit, that's all you know. Sometimes you even question yourself. What am I doing? I am just getting nowhere with this. And then you hear a story about a kid. Or then you see, and you're out in public somewhere, and somebody says to me, you know what? Do you remember me? And you'll say, oh, well, I was here, 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 here. I was at a group home you used to work at. Really? Well, now I'm this, 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 and this. And it's not because of you being there, working there, but collectively for whoever was there made a whole difference in the fact of somebody maybe carrying that on to their community. So if there's anything that I'm grateful for, was that lesson. I don't think that they knew that they were teaching that lesson because many of us took it. All of my siblings are philanthropically engaged, and all of my nieces and nephews that are of age are philanthropically engaged. I guess the seed on all sides, every single grandparent taught that some way or another. Every grandparent taught that. And so, it's a good thing. I
Yeah,
hope we carried on.
that's a beautiful story. What kind of clinics were your father's clinics? You said 73rd and Western?
It's a medical clinic. It still stands there. It was an OBGYN clinic, and then it turned to family practice. So that's where many of the lessons were learned.
Yeah, going down and working. And how did you
Going
do that
to the hood? Yeah.
every
Summer.
every summer?
Until I decided that I wanted my summers, and either he was going to pay me or I was going to go get a job that paid, but I was no longer going to work for free.
Right.
So, but that's how that worked.
Yeah.
And so, but it teaches good work ethic as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it sounds like you had some amazing role models in your family, which is always a nice advantage to have.
It is. And, when you have a mother that also grew up of challenging backgrounds, and she was a homemaker, and she loved her family dearly. So my love of family comes from my mother, who taught me family first, beyond others, and to give and be for family unconditionally. And that if anybody comes for your family,
Watch out, right?
watch out. Watch out. And that love is really love over money, love over power. It's about family. And so together, between that philanthropic movement and love for family, you can hear it intertwined in everything that I do. It really is who I am.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, you've dedicated your life to this.
yeah, you got a new job for me?
Yeah,
No.
right. No, you're too busy. So that's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
And I think it will be inspiring for people to hear. And I want to end this with trying to maybe wrap things up or summarize things, not wrap things up, but summarize some of this, because we talked a lot about this idea of equity. We talked about your formula for equity, which I love. And I'm curious, like in the wake of COVID, in the wake of the activism that was positive in response to the George Floyd murder, like what do you think is working with equity and what's not working?
Equity and equality are have two different definitions. So what's not working is the fact that we've started the equity conversations, but we still don't have equality. That's the first problem, which means we talked about that earlier. We're having all of these processes, but in the end of the day, are folks that don't look like X, do they still have equal opportunity in our country across the board in any of those endeavors? So what is working is the fact that the conversations have begun. What is working is there's been an attempt. What's not working is that the conversations have not gone in depth enough in some spaces. What's not working is the collaboration and the coagulation of thought processes to get to that common denominator. There's still too many opinions about what works and what doesn't work. And what is not working is the self-aggrandizement of the big picture and of big business. And until people want to let go of the big hunky over here, are we really going to make a difference? Because in the end of the day, it appears to me that unfortunately, we just need to make sure that the corporate conversation is consistent and we're not just throwing dollars at the issues. Because we have to hold the community accountable too. The community has to be accountable for the impact. We need to be at the table, though, to talk about what does the impact look like. It doesn't just look like what you think it may look like. That needle may just move just a little bit until we can get to the next stage, and that's still a deliverable, and that's still impact. I think we need to look at that definition of what does that mean, because it looks very differently across the board. And so, this picture right here, why is it that what works, what doesn't? Why is it that we needed to put on the front of our strategic impact report the fact that somebody's mouth has been silenced on their ability to vote? 2023. So what is working and what's not working, I think we can still see it around us. We can just do better with conversations, being better with our transactions, being more intentional, and being unapologetic. That's part of what I think still is not happening. We still need to be correct. It's okay. You only got 1 or 2 more chances at this anyway. So why not be unapologetic about your intentions to go make the playing field equal? And I think that all communities, in terms of our ethnicities and cultures, need to start doing more of that cross-sectional conversation, cross relations. I think if we're going to get to it in the end of the day, I don't see enough of that happening. It happens when something happens. Everybody links up, make sure we got that photo op, walking together across the bridge, together as one. As soon as the cameras, that bothers me. So making sure that the conversations are real with our elected officials and that our elected officials are intentional about hearing what the needs are. And we know that some of the newly electeds are doing just that. They ran on that. They ran on the commitments. So what is working and what's not working, that hopefully I hope will work and work its way out where the politics of this city are not so scripted anymore. And that legislators hear these are the things, and you may not get all the votes the next time because it's not so popular. That's what we, I think, need more of. And again, private-public partnerships. What does that look like? It's working in some spaces. It really is. You're in housing. I think that, the number of what I think's working with equality and equity is in the housing market. We have to do more affordable. We've got to make more spaces for those that can't access, to give them a leg up. And each one, what I think is starting to work is any of these entities that say, we'll give you a little leg up. We'll make the criteria of X maybe not so stringent. We'll give you an opportunity just because you have a record. Maybe we might have to just let you in on the fact that you're doing X, trying to move towards a better life and be less judgmental as we're asking ourselves to be unapologetic. So, yes, I'm not going to drill down in the absolute concrete because I've spent all day saying it has to be different. And that's part of what we all do is we get on these shows and we get in front of the cameras and we've just got the plan. I don't think we have it yet. I think the plan is to get back to these tables and to create and really assess for what's working and what's not, to your question. And I don't think we have a lot of time to do so. And I also think that, do you remember the days where there were czars? It was for accountability, right? What part of that do we have now? I'll just like to ask that of you. If I could turn this mic.
Yeah. Doesn't seem like there's a whole lot, right? Across these big issues. There's no one in charge of homelessness. There's no one in charge of housing. There's a bunch of people who are trying to make a difference, but there's no one place to go.
Exactly. So if I thought of anything that worked from the past that might be reinstituted, it would be something, a model of that, But I think overall, look, the eradication of something, I've said it all day, I don't know if that's going to happen. Equality, it's about building a stronger tomorrow by building jobs. That gets people to the table, by empowering individuals that are dismayed or marginalized and showing them there is a way that you can get a piece of this old American pie that is now so diverse, and it's flan and it's pie and it's cookies and it's all kinds of stuff. It is no longer just American pie, but you can get a piece of pie. And so that's the way I look at it. Building stakeholders, it's working, but I think we have to look at it in the private-public partnerships. What are those stakeholders and what do we really need? And just because you've been playing in the game 100 years, what's not working is let some of the smaller guys in. Let some of the innovators in. Let some folks that haven't been at the table, give them a shot. And if they're under the barrier of whatever the fiscal common denominator of dollars, so be it. Let them in. So if the baseline is $500,000 to play and they only got $250,000, you figure out the variance, but let them at the table. I'm tired of that. it's just, we're not going to get anywhere if we don't let people have an opportunity to just bring their intellectual skill set to the table. They may not have the financial skill set. And I think that's why we're still missing who plays at this table, because even post-COVID, even when you were sending out the monies for equity and inclusion during COVID, there was a hit list. And if you weren't a part of there are plenty of people that got left out of that. And some of those nonprofits didn't make it. There's plenty of folks that would still be here today if they were considered one of the players. But during COVID, only some of us were called. Why was that? We can hand out food better than some people. We can help give out a blanket better than some. We can knock on door better than others. Come on now. It's ridiculous. Spread that out a little bit more and give people more opportunity. And I think that's what our Mayor Karen Bass will do. And I think that we may have a better opportunity to have deeper conversations of equity in line of eventually getting to equality. I don't think we need to talk about equality until we get diversity plus inclusion equals equity. And once we get that equation solved, then we're going to be saying we won't have to worry about how to get to equality. We would have solved it. But I don't know yet about equality. I know that we all have our own beliefs about it. And I know that we have our elevator pitch. But when you really start feeling that as a woman, I'm not welcome, or I have to work harder to get to a table, or the fact that I'm the first woman in 100 years to sit in this seat, you tell me about equality. I'm perfectly able many years ago, but I just got here 2023.
Yep.
As they say, go figure.
Go figure.
Go figure. I learned in the pulpit, don't get me preaching up in here.
Right.
So,
well, last question for you. Let's say that you're a business leader or a business owner, or maybe even just an ordinary Angelino or citizen, and you really care about equity. What can you do? What is your advice to somebody in that position who doesn't want to pay lip service, doesn't want to just virtue signal, but actually wants to make a difference in the community on this issue? What should they do?
I think that people need to get involved in their local communities. I think that it's easy to sit back and judge. This work is not easy. We've talked over an hour and done just that. There's a lot of opinion about how to get to the goal, but it cannot happen without the involvement of communities. If there's something that you're seeing in your community, don't be quiet about it. Talk about it. Get to the agencies. We're not the only agency. There's many agencies within your own community that give you an opportunity to get involved, whether that's being involved in volunteering to help in some of these areas, or just creating an opportunity for yourself. If you don't think that the organizations are doing what they need to do, find a mechanism by which you feel is doing it, and join and be a part of it. There is hopefully something that everybody can do. Please just don't sit idle, because there's too much work to do. There's too much rhetoric. There's too much of all of too much. And so the one thing that we do need is support. You also can be involved philanthropically through donating to fiscally support the choice of your impact. You can be involved there. Or, we spoke about the next generation. If you don't believe that what's going on now is the way you want to see it, get to the front of that line and start impacting different components that are engaging with our next generation, and see where you can assist there as well. There's so many ways right now, and those are just a few. But I don't want to be too idealistic in the ABCs of how to help. I always say just get in where you want to fit in, period. Whatever makes you happy. It could just mean planting flowers within your community, so that it could mean if you see a homeless person out in front of your front yard, maybe go have a conversation with them and figure out how they got there, not why they're there in terms of being a menace to society, maybe how they got there. You don't like the way education reform, you don't like the way a healthcare system is working, then figure out where those regulatory items are, figure out, and more so, where else can you help? You could simply vote. If you don't like it, vote. Unfortunately, we know that some people feel as though to vote, then still what happens? So, and if you're one of those, you might have to create a system by which you think addresses your needs, and you can do that too. So there's a lot of ways, and there's no one particular formula to getting out and helping people. But I think the most important thing is just don't sit idle and think it's somebody else's problem, because here in Los Angeles, that might be what we're facing now, because guess what? If we don't fix this that we have, it is going to be all of our problems, and currently it is. And this is what it looks like if you sit by idle and don't have something to say, or don't want to make it somebody else's problem. And right now, I'll end with this. It is not just our Mayor Bass's problem. She's one person in a broken system. So if you have access to any of these broken systems and want to do something, whether it be help in the mental health by volunteering, or help by getting down to the union rescue, or help in outreach, or help, that's where we might want to begin to start helping. Or if you even have a plan to help Nick and how to build more affordable housing, call him at www.
Yeah, exactly.
Any of those would work. Nick, I love this platform. You are doing an amazing job at allowing people to just speak upon the issues that are so most important to the paradigm shift of our country and our world. And thank you for being a forward thinker. And thank you for having me here. It was a risk, because you can see I get that mic and I get to preaching. But thanks for thinking that I was important enough to the issue to have me on here today. I appreciate it a lot.
You're welcome. And thank you for those kind words. Like, I felt like this was a really fun conversation, and we talked about some meaty stuff, and I really appreciate all that you shared, and can't wait to get it out there and share it with the rest of the world. So thank you for taking the time out of your day, your busy day, to come and do this. I appreciate you.
Only for you and my niece, Ellie.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Nick Halera Show. We hope you enjoyed the episode and would appreciate your help with spreading the word by sharing with your network on social. And until next time, remember, it's not about pursuing success to unlock fulfillment. It's about learning how to find fulfillment in the midst of success.